And when we get involved with God's heart in the world that He made, our Father's world, lives will begin to be changed. People will come to know Jesus. And we desire these people to come together. We want to see groups of young people passionately winning non-believers to Jesus Christ and organically resulting in the planting of churches at home, in their communities, across their nations, across our region, across the world. In the book of Acts, when God's Spirit got a hold of a praying people in the upper room, the church exploded. These people who said, "Send me, here I am." They were not meeting in large buildings. They did not own church property. Their pastors had not gone to Bible college or seminary, but they were encountering the living God and being radically changed. And God's Spirit was driving them, leading them, pushing them out to encounter the hearts, the hurts, and the lives of others, to share this good news with a people who had not heard. Relationships, interaction. Young people understand these things so well. And the youth are the perfect group of people that God wants to use to do these kinds of things, to see growing numbers of believers, not necessarily growing numbers of church buildings. This is the church multiplying. This is the church which grew daily. This is the church as a body of believers and not just a building. This is the church without walls. The reality is many of our churches are struggling. And this does not mean that God is somehow not faithful or lacks power. But maybe we are needing to understand a different idea of what it is to be the church.
We're shifting from the day of the ordained to the day of the ordinary, where God indeed ordains the ordinary to do His work, and He gets more glory for it.
People have been spectators in the life of the church for so many years, they don't even know they have a ministry.
Most people, when they think of the word church, they think of a building with a steeple on it, and that's not what church is. Church is God's people involved in doing God's business.
We are going to really affect the nations of the world and multiply at the pace God wants us to multiply. It has to be done much simpler.
God says, give me back my church so that I can give it back to the world.
We want to lower the bar of how we do church and raise the bar of what it means to be a disciple.
Move out of your church buildings and be again there where you're supposed to be, which is where the pain is, where the hurt is, where the people are.
They don't just do the ministry somewhere back at some church they go to on the weekend, but they're doing the ministry 24/7 during the week with the people amongst themselves, and they're being the church and can do the church there.
500 years ago, as we know, God gave the Bible back to the ordinary people, into the hands of the ordinary people, and as someone has said recently, 500 years on in the Second Reformation, in a sense, God's giving the church back to the ordinary people.
It is absolutely essential that lay people start churches.
The church has been preparing them for ministry in the church, but not ministry in their world.
We can't be a come-to-us type church. We have to be a go-to, and it has to be contextualized in every area.
For most of us, we've learned to grow things, but we haven't learned to reproduce, and reproduce at every level, leaders, small groups, churches.
And it's actually the people in the church as a collective body that are responsible for then starting churches.
The reality of simple church is the idea of living out the life of Christ in the midst of the people on a regular basis.
A typical house church, basically about 10, 15 people would do four things. They would have a meeting, M-E-A-T-I-N-G. They would eat. The eating business was absolutely crucial to the ministry of Jesus. He was almost a specialist in eating in other people's homes. Secondly, they were sharing life, not an hour. Number 3, they don't just listen to someone exposed in the Bible in 3 points in 31 minutes and then go home and forget 95% on the way. They are participating in almost eating the Bible together. Number 4, they were praying and prophesying. Praying is when we talk to God. Prophesying is when God talks to us.
It's designed where there's community, where we turn our chairs to face each other. We're not looking at the back of each other's heads, and there's not rows of noses, but we're doing things in community. We're learning in community. We're sharing with one another, and there's accountability.
We're shifting from the day of the ordained to the day of the ordinary, where God indeed ordains the ordinary to do his work, and he gets more glory for it.
God ordains the ordinary to do his work, and he gets more glory for it. You see, God does want this. God wants to see young people, teenagers, planting churches. He wants them to be reaching out to new people, touching hearts and lives, and seeing these people come to know Jesus, gathering together and forming a new church. This is church planting. But can we get our heads past that? Can a teenager really plant a church? Do we need to have a building to have church? Do we have to have a pastor who has a Bible college education or a seminary education to be a pastor, to be a church? No. And the Church of the Nazarene agrees with this. This is the definition of our denomination of what it is to be a church. Any group that meets regularly for spiritual nurture, worship, or instruction at an announced time and place with an identified leader and aligned and in agreement with the mission, the values of the Church of the Nazarene. Can you imagine if the young people in your church were so on fire for God and in their loving involvement with children and the people of their communities, that people were coming to know Christ, and that naturally churches were springing up all over the place, and that those churches were causing other churches to spring up? Can you imagine? What would that do to your church? What would that do to your community? What would that do to the district you serve on? Can you imagine? How does God want this to happen in your life? How does God want to see this happen in your community, where you live, in your district?